The next mainline entry in the long-running Resident Evil franchise just got an update, or should I say, a big rumor. And while it may not be to the liking of some people if this turns out to be true, it's not all doom and gloom for Resident Evil. We're diving into this insider information, plus everything we currently know about Resident Evil 9, so if you're looking for some potential insight into the status of the next mainline Resident Evil game and want to know every detail that we know about it from over the years, this is definitely the video for you. When it comes to insider information, I just want to put this out there. Take it all with heaping grains of salt, because as this particular insider has been spot on in regards to leaking significant details about Resident Evil Village and details about Resident Evil 4 Remake, you still need to know that this info has not been confirmed by Capcom whatsoever. Alright, with that out of the way, yup, you guessed it. We've got a new statement by Aesthetic Gamer, aka Dusk Golem, on his Discord that sheds light on the status of Resident Evil 9, the next mainline Resident Evil game. Dusk begins by stating that the plan for many years was for the game to be announced sometime in 2024 for a planned 2025 release. And while he suggests that that could still be a possibility, he claims to have heard more and more about Resident Evil 9 potentially having been delayed. This has not been the first time Resident Evil games have gotten delays, and seeing how ambitious Resident Evil 9 sounds if the rumors turn out to be true, of which we'll get into later, I wouldn't be surprised if Capcom decides to push this one back to give it some more time to cook. Getting back to Dusk's statement, he claims that, if his sources are correct, that another Resident Evil game may end up being announced and released first before Resident Evil 9, before admitting that this isn't something he's heard concretely. Okay. He then starts his last paragraph of this post clarifying that these, quote, murmurs are coming from various sources, seemingly trying to add some sort of credibility to this lead, if you can call it that. Alright, heaping grains of salt, good people, but again, I wouldn't be surprised either way if this becomes true and Capcom ends up releasing another Resident Evil game before RE9 to give that game some more time to cook. This is definitely not the most outlandish thing I've heard, but getting back to the post, Dusk adds that he, quote, kinda wants it to be true, referring to the replacement game happening in RE9's stead. Because if that were to happen, this Resident Evil game that would be replacing RE9 in 2025 is, quote, pretty funny and would catch a lot of people off guard. Alright, wow, that's a whole lot right there. And I think a lot of people are going to be focusing on the statement we just read about this game likely catching some fans off guard. As to what this is, absolutely no one knows. I mean, if you ask me, I think perhaps a Resident Evil 1 remake would catch a decent amount of people off guard because, well, the OG has already been remade. Perhaps a continuation of Resident Evil Revelations with a release of the third game? At this point, who knows? It seems like Code Veronica and RE5 are likely the next in line for remakes. Revelations 3 sounds pretty solid, and you know what? I honestly wouldn't be surprised if Outbreak gets remade if Capcom wants to try their luck again at multiplayer Resident Evil. But sound off in the comments what you think this mystery game could be should this actually happen. From the insider information about RE9 that we're about to get into, suggesting Resident Evil 9 is going to be on a scale much greater than any Resident Evil that has come before it, I wouldn't be surprised if Capcom ends up putting another RE project in development out before Resident Evil 9 releases. But again, like I said at the start of this video, this is all just a rumor with no real evidence to back it up. Alright, Resident Evil 9 and what we know of it so far. Again, none of this information has been confirmed by Capcom, and some of what we are about to get into has been pretty well-known information since the leaks started surfacing all the way back in August 2022. So if you'd like to learn more about potential aspects or just some unproven leaks for the game, you are in the right place. Let's first take a look back in August 2022, where the first leak surfaced over on 4chan. Claiming that the working title for the game was Resident Evil Apocalypse. While I don't have the 4chan leak in front of me because I can't freaking find the original post, other content creators and Resident Evil fans have stated that Apocalypse would more or less reflect the following. The game would take place somewhere in the western regions of North America, where players would be able to explore caves, forests, rivers, and their natural surroundings, implying that the game would be on a scale much larger than the typical, more confined settings of Resident Evil. Apocalypse would revolve around the 9th moon cycle, where creatures like goatmen and wendigos would be the common enemies. These creatures were said to be able to transform and fool players into thinking they were friendly NPCs before attacking, which would admittedly create an interesting dynamic. Another enemy, called a Barghest, resembles a quote giant black dog with a twist, with the main antagonist being a woman called Glaistig, adorned in green and covered in gold. The player is said to be accompanied by a female bioweapon called Hunter, serving as your guide in the wilderness. The leak reportedly emphasized that there would be a greater focus on survival horror, as players could barricade themselves in houses, giving players a similar aesthetic to the village segments of RE Village. This leak also said it is very easy to get lost in the map, as Apocalypse's map is reportedly quite massive. Alright, so this leak basically serves as the basis for what much of the newer leaks have added onto, especially the most recent one. But the next leak that happened after this initial 4chan leak would come in June of 2023, where a now delisted Twitter post from user Chris Marks stated that Chris Redfield would be the main protagonist of Resident Evil 9. He further added that a slew of legacy Resident Evil characters would be accompanying Chris Redfield in this 9th mainline game, including the likes of Jill Valentine, Claire Redfield, and Leon S. Kennedy, which, if true, would be so freaking awesome. Definitely hope we get to see more of these legacy RE protagonists back in the series, but let's get back on track here. Fast forward to October of 2023, and Dusk Golem states 2 new tidbits of info. That Resident Evil 9 is the biggest budget Resident Evil 9 game with the longest development time for any Resident Evil game to date, stating that it started development back in 2018 and that the game wouldn't release until 2025 at the absolute earliest. This kind of reflects his most recent statement about Resident Evil 9 being pushed back to make way for another RE game in 2025, doesn't it? Secondly, Dusk adds that Capcom sees Resident Evil 9 as a closing act for some things, perhaps the Winter Saga, to make way for new story arcs to take the series in new directions. Sounds about right to me. Alright, we're getting closer to the most recent leak, but we're not quite there yet, because a few months ago, in February 2024, Dusk Golem stated that 5 Resident Evil games were in development at Capcom, with one of them being Resident Evil 9. I made a video about all those games that could be in development, of which you can view here in this card. Just make sure to come back to this video, because the most recent leak that happened in late March, also from Dusk Golem, states that Resident Evil 9 is going open world. Dusk explains that Resident Evil 9 and the upcoming Monster Hunter Wilds are building on Dragon's Dogma 2's updated RE engine, which further expanded the capabilities for open world gameplay. He later posted that just as Dragon's Dogma 2 is like Dragon's Dogma 1 and Monster Hunter Wilds is like Monster Hunter, that RE9 will very much be Resident Evil, implying that the core DNA of Resident Evil will remain intact. And that is the complete history of Resident Evil 9 leaks up to this point. Let me know in the comments what you think of all this. Do you think the early leaks of RE Apocalypse still hold their weight? What do you think about an open world Resident Evil game? As for me, I wouldn't be surprised if much of this actually comes true. There seems to be a thread within these leaks that the game is going to be much grander in scale, as outlined from the oldest Apocalypse leaks all the way to the most current one, with it potentially being an open world game, and with Dusk claiming that this Resident Evil contains the biggest budget along with it having achieved the longest time in production. Regardless if this all turns out to be true, Resident Evil 9 is going to be absolutely massive. If RE9 ends up being delayed, I'm cool with it, so long as Capcom takes their time to let this one cook so that it can be the best it can possibly be. And if another RE game comes in to fill in that 2025 spot, let's hope that one delivers too. Regardless, it's likely an RE game will launch in 2025, so we will no doubt be hearing more about this upcoming Resident Evil game soon, so stay tuned to this channel to keep up with the latest in Resident Evil, and watch this video going over what I believe could be the next 5 games in production. And I look forward to seeing all you good people real soon in the next one.